So I shall say good afternoon and welcome to the 2nd of July 2020 meeting of the Climate Change Steering Group. My name is Councillor Catherine Field and I'm chair of that group. This meeting is being held remotely and is being live streamed via YouTube, and the recording will be available afterwards on our website. Councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones on silent if they have one near them, leave their cameras on for the steering group members only, and mute their microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and saves bandwidth to prevent loss of connection. So I'm going to start by doing a roll call to check all members who are expected to attend are present. As I say your name, please turn on your microphones and confirm you are connected. So members of the steering group are Councillor Sam Coleman.
Present.
Councillor Polly Gray.
Present.
Councillor Sally Ann Hart. I believe she's not here. Right. Councillor Lynn Langlands.
Present.
Councillor Paul Osborne.
Present.
And Councillor Sue Prochek.
Present.
Good, that's all of us. So we can now start the agenda. And I'm going to start off with apologies for absence. Have we had any?
No, we haven't had any official apologies, no.
Right, thank you.
You might like to mention, Chairman, that we do actually have quite a few officers with us today, and we do have another councillor with us today, which is Councillor Mrs. Cook.
Sorry. Right, Councillor Cook is attending, as you will have heard. For the benefit of those listening who don't know our structures, could I just ask the officers to introduce themselves and say who they are?
Afternoon, my name's Tony Leonard. I'm here as Executive Barrack.
Good afternoon, my name is Ben Hook. I'm the Head of Service for Acquisitions, Transformation and Regeneration.
Good afternoon, my name is Tim Hickling. I'm the Head of Service for Planning and Strategy.
Hello, Rich Parker-Harding, Head of Environment Health and Licensing.
Good afternoon, I'm Joe Powell, the Head of Housing and Community.
Thank you. Is that all of us?
No, we do have some other officers with us as well. If I just run through the list, it might be easier. So we should have with us Nicola Waters, the Planning Policy Manager, Joanne Wright, the Policy Officer, Nicola Mitchell, Programme and Projects Officer, and Angie Edwards, the Corporate Programme and Business Improvement Officer. We've also got another Democratic Services Officer supporting me today, which is Louise Hollingsworth, and I'm Julie Hollands, the Democratic Services Officer supporting the meeting today.
Right. In that case, I think we can ready to now move on to item 2, which is disclosures of interest. This is to receive any disclosure by members of personal and disclosable pecuniary interests in matters on the agenda, the nature of any interest, and whether the member regards the personal interest as prejudicial under the terms of the Code of Conduct. Members are reminded of the need to repeat their declaration immediately prior to the commencement of the item in question. Members, have you any interest you need to declare? Resounding silence. I think that means no. So item 3 then is minutes of the last meeting, which was held on the 3rd of January. Are you happy with those, members? Again, I guess yes.
Can we have someone to move it and second it, please, Chairman?
I'll move it. Councillor Langlands.
Second, Councillor Prochek.
Thank you. And I have a note that Councillor Coleman would like to say something.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was going to just mention that in the matters arising, I did actually ask for it to be the LGBTQ plus, as in the acronym, because that covers the whole community rather than the 5 groups listed there. And also it was Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities, and then migrants separately, which I think is an important distinction. But nonetheless, I think those groups were covered in the actual consultation. I think it's a learning point for future consultations. Thank you, Chair.
I'm very happy with that change. Members, are you? I can only see the nods of people on my screen. I can't hear if you don't verbalise.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, fine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks very much. So can we now move on to item 4, which is the consultation report. Ben, are you introducing this?
So, yes, if that's okay with you, Chair.
Please do.
Members will have received the consultation results report. The responses, the consultation went out as a result of the started on the 25th of February and went out for a total of 12 weeks. The consultation plan identified a number of groups that would be directly impacted by the environment strategy, and therefore the comments from those groups were specifically targeted. In terms of the response, we had 108 responses from local residents. 19 responses were received by identified organisations. The identified organisations are listed in Appendix A for those of for all those organisations that were directly approached by the council for the purposes of this consultation. So that giving a total of 135 responses. I'll say at this stage that is significantly less than what we would normally anticipate for a consultation of this magnitude, particularly with the impacts that this strategy will have going forward. But I think given the fact that it was launched in February and then ran for 12 weeks during the height of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown, it severely restricted the ability of the council to promote the strategy and its consultation in anything other than a digital environment. So we had originally planned a number of events in Bexhill, Battle and Rye that would have drawn members of the public into that in a bit more of a positive way, and obviously local press were covering different issues at the time. So it is lower than we would expect. However, saying that, the quality of the responses that we've received has been exceptional, I would say. And I think the detail and the effort that's gone into those responses from all those who have come back to us, I think, has been really fantastic. And I think obviously myself and officers, and I'm sure members, will like to thank all of those who partook in the consultation. As a result of those responses, we've condensed it down into the areas within the action plan for those responses that came in from the organisations that were directly approached, and that is included in supplementary document 1. In supplementary document 2 is all of the responses from all of the 108 residents that responded, and that's been categorised in by the question that was asked, rather than sort of divvying it up between the action plan. From the outcomes of the consultation, there's been 10 recommendations that 10 additional recommendations for inclusion, and we've sort of tried to group these into areas. They are light pollution and dark skies, supply chain, a reduction in business rates and council tax for good environmental practice, review of strategy, a re-review of the strategy in light of government policy and social distancing as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. Some people would like to see additional references to the High Weald Management Plan, to address the ecological collapse and biodiversity crisis, public transport, inclusion of farmland and working the countryside, hydrogen and biomethane, and then vehicle noise. We've listed these out in paragraph 11 of your report, and in Appendix B of the report, we've broken that down into to include all of the direct comments that were provided by the organisations in relation to those additional recommendations. So really what we're asking members of the steering group to consider today is the outcome of the consultation, and whether or not it's felt that the strategy as it is meets the needs of what the public expect as regards to the environment strategy, and whether or not there should be additional inclusion of these additional recommendations. The one thing I would say is that the overall response to the through the consultation to the proposed strategy has been very positive. I think people are it's been received very positively. I think people are pleasantly surprised at how detailed it's been and how many areas it covers. The one thing I would say is just to give members an additional consideration is that this report in effect came out of the climate emergency declaration back in September from council. So the strategy itself does have a particular focus on carbon reduction and particulate reduction, as well as covering a number of other areas. A lot of the additional recommendations deviate from that into other environmental areas, and that's completely that's completely expected. I think the one thing I would say, just in terms of your considerations, is that the resource that's able to go into the strategy is limited by the cost, and therefore to overwhelm the strategy, if you like, at this stage with additional recommendations might dilute the ability to deliver on the core purpose of the strategy at this, which is to respond to the climate change emergency declaration. So just as a consideration, when talking through the additional recommendations as to whether or not it would help that goal, what I would say actually is that all of these, whether or not you decide now to include them, should remain as a consideration for future years. And we've already said that this strategy is a live strategy, and it will be continually updated over the period of the 2020 to 2030 programme, and therefore actually there's nothing to say that these can't come in later years once progress has been made on the early actions. Other than that, Chairman, I'll hand over to you for the discussion points.
Thank you. Yes, I would like to start also by thanking, well, the public, of course, who've contributed. And I was very encouraged myself about the quality of the comments that we had, generally supportive and a few very useful additions, I thought, and again to the staff for all the work they've done collating the responses. I'm not quite sure how you want to do this. I'm going to ask first if members have got any general comments want to make, and then I'd like to go through this list of additional recommendations, because we have at the end got to produce something for Cabinet to agree or not to agree. My first point I wanted to raise was several people said, and I think they're right, that it should be called a climate emergency or a climate change strategy, not an environment strategy. And my personal view is that that's right, because as Ben has just said, our resources are very limited. This did spring out of the climate emergency resolution. And if we broaden it out to environment, we really are holding ourselves hostage to fortune, in that it could encompass an awful lot more than I think we can resource. I mean, I might be wrong, you might disagree. That is my personal view. I think climate change strategy would actually focus people's minds on what it is we're trying to achieve here. There are, as the Highwood AONB unit said, other people who are discussing the environment in a different way. We are about to develop our own local plan, which I would hope would have lots of planning policies in it, which will help us to do this. So that's my opening general remarks. Before we look at paragraph 11, has anybody else got anything general they'd like to say? Sue.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, just thank you, Ben, for the very good introduction, and obviously all the work that's gone on, because a lot of words in this document, a lot of words to put out. I'm so disappointed in terms of the response, although it was a shame we couldn't have our public events. I think they would have been a really good opportunity to get this out further. But I think the thing to take on board is that we had 19 organisations which responded. Now, I don't know what the membership of those organisations is, but I should imagine at least 50 members in each, which really, when you count that as a response, that increases the weight of the responses enormously. It was interesting because Councillor Gray and I attended the event with the MP just the other day, and I think now it does feel as though things are being treated as an emergency. It does feel that way. And so our strategy is timely. It is interesting, isn't it, I think, Ben, you're absolutely right, that it should be a living document, a living strategy, and it should, we could prioritise things. We don't have to leave things out because we can't do them now. We had hoped to have an officer in place by this stage, which would have moved us on enormously, because our officers are stretched with the COVID-19 work. But once that officer is in place, I think we can gallop on with this. It's an interesting point you've raised, Chairman, about the difference between climate emergency and environment strategy. We've put this out as an environment strategy. People have responded to it as such, not just carbon reduction or... So if we're going to sort those out, that's another task that is a little bit challenging, I think. And then there are people of views, I think, that say even things like dark skies, footpaths, biodiversity is also part of carbon reduction.
Absolutely.
So I think that needs a bit of expertise to help us sort that one out. But I think we shouldn't be too disappointed with this. We're on our way.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to just query. It said in the list of organisations, it had Bexhill Youth Council, and as the councillor who recently restarted Bexhill Youth Council, I've not been aware of any communications about this consultation. I mean, I brought it up at our first meeting with the new youth councillors independently, but it was never I had never had an email sent to anywhere. And I don't know if perhaps we have an old email address for the previous Bexhill Youth Council when last it existed. But I think there is a more general point, which is that there is a perception when it comes to Rotherham consultations that we're not very good at them, and generally, not specifically to this one. And I think we do need to start looking at how we do our consultations and how we can better increase our responses, because whilst you could say a low response rate means that nobody was so aggrieved by it that they had to comment, and it would be nice to hear more opinions from more people in our communities.
Thank you. I've just seen Tony. Did you want to come in? Dr. Leonard?
Chairman, I'm going to allow members to talk first. I was just going to go through how we probably like to structure the debate against each of those items. So unless members have had their comments on the generalities, then I'll come back in then.
I think they have. I was about to move on and discuss these items item by item.
In which case, then, I think on this, I think there's been points being picked up that officers have picked up as well. I think we slightly put a noose around our own neck on this one by calling ourselves a climate change steering group and then sending out a consultation on environment strategy. And so the consequences we got back on the responses were we got mainly environmental sort of emissions from this strategy because we're focusing on climate change. I think that's something we just need to be mindful of. Having said that, though, as Ben has made clear, it doesn't mean to say we just push those one side, ignore them. I think there are other avenues where we can address some of these queries, and taking those particularly like the light pollution, which is the first one, that could be a very significant part of the new local plan policies that would really help and support the environment strategy. So as we go through this, we may want to think about what other avenues are there for getting these actions into other strategies rather than just the environment strategy, and whether we wish to rename this environment strategy as a climate change strategy, so it's very clear what we're trying to achieve on that, or whether you wish to keep it as an environment strategy and then we build on it over the future years as our experience and knowledge and successes gain momentum.
Sorry.
So what I was going to say is what you may want to do is each of these recommendations for inclusion, we go through one by one, get members' views, and then think about how we're going to action them against other strategies, or whether we embed them into this strategy, or whether we defer it to a later date when we've got more momentum behind the strategy as a whole.
Thank you. Sue. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm there. Sorry.
It's okay.
Little hand waves in the wrong direction. Just what you said, it would be very, very interesting to pull in planning here, because as we've discussed in the past in many meetings, one of the main vehicles that a local authority has is the local plan for getting some of this stuff done. So it would be really interesting to pull in the views from Nicola or somebody, or Tim perhaps, because there's nothing much wrong in having it in two places, is there?
No.
Absolutely not. Have it in two places as long as they don't contradict one another.
My assumption was that this would include everything, and underpinning that would be the policies which we have wherever they sit that would help to implement what this overarching strategy, which I see as the direction for the council, is going to go in. Sorry, Tim.
Sorry, I was just going to come in, Chair, just to say a couple of points. I'm sure Nicola can also elaborate on these points. I mean, a number of these areas we're talking about can be covered by planning, or indeed the High Weald Management Plan. So light pollution and dark skies is something I'm sure the High Weald Management Plan cover, and we can ask Nicola what her views about incorporating that into the local plan. Public transport, of course, that's something quite clearly local plan can promote and change potentially. Ecological impact, likewise. The use of farmland and the working countryside, that's covered by the High Weald Management Plan. And those are sort of the areas you could look at in terms of planning policy. But what I would say is planning policy can only address new development, not existing scenarios. So there is a distinction there. If we're looking to, when we promote new development, that the bar, if you like, is raised in terms of climate change, yes, by all means. But it's very difficult to fit that in with the existing situation with what's going on now, as opposed to future development. So I don't know if Nicola wants to say anything specifically about the local plan.
Nicola?
Hi, yeah, sorry, I've got a bit of a slow connection, so sometimes my camera and microphone takes a few seconds to kick in. We do have some existing policy references in the local plan itself at the moment. So we've got a high level policy in the core strategy relating to dark night skies. And then we have an environmental pollution policy which references dark night skies within the development site allocations plan, which was adopted last year. But it certainly is something that can be part of the local plan update and embrace wider considerations and more detailed considerations about dark night skies. But Tim raised the other point that I was going to say about, obviously we can only deal with new development and new situations. We can't retrospectively deal with the built environment that's already there.
I'm interested to hear you say that, because am I not right in thinking that a lot of listed buildings need permission to do any sort of retrofitting? In which case, should we not be having policies which enable them to do things which will save their heating and keep it in the house, and not let it leak and add to the climate change?
It's certainly things that we can look at policies having in the new plan, and when things need permission, listed building or planning permission, then it's something that we can have policies which relate to that. But what I'm saying is, if things don't need permission, then we have very limited powers on what we can do to rectify that kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. I don't think anybody else wants to talk about that. Oh, hang on. Oh. Sorry. Can't get my screen up now. Lynn, and then Ben.
Yes, I did. I was just wondering here, with this sort of difficulty with combining a climate emergency with an environment strategy and how we're going to go about it. Could we not cover that? I'd hate to see some of these things left on the shelf. I don't mean that completely ignore, but left aside, or try to incorporate them somewhere else. I think if you're doing an environment strategy, it needs to all be in there. But could we not somehow consider how the action plan focuses on the climate emergency side of it, because that is our priority at the moment? So is there some way we could use our action plan to highlight the things that we're going to do first and foremost, and then the other things can dovetail in as we go along?
Thank you, Ben.
I think Councillor Langlands has just hit the nail on the head with what I was going to say. Really, I think keeping it abroad as an environment strategy means that it can at some point in the future encompass a much wider range of activity. And I think what my anticipation and my hope was that we would get some early wins in the first few years in terms of tackling the climate emergency, which would give us some momentum and put us on the right track with that, at which point we could then look to broaden out our focus into other areas of environment and of the environment. So I think it's important that we do keep it broader, and not only that, but councillors, we've spoken in other forums about how the other corporate strategies, be it the corporate plan, the local plan, economic recovery strategy, should all be taking serious consideration of the environment strategy for its lead and its steer as to how we're going to, drive the policy of this council forward into the future. And therefore, I think, as Councillor Langland said, actually maybe finding a way to include this in the body of the strategy, but focusing the action plan on the climate change emergency in the early years, and then allowing that to evolve over time, might be the way that we can do that, so that all policies, all actions throughout the council take consideration of this strategy, but the direct actions that we'll be taking as a result of it will be focused on the climate change in the early years.
Thank you. Are you all happy with that approach? I can see Lynn nodding. Right. Good.
Yes.
Good. Sue, you wanted to say
just adding. Yeah. So, I mean, it's really good to hear that Ben's grasped where we're going. It's excellent. Thank you, Ben. I think the other thing is, and I think Catherine, you've mentioned this more than once, is, and also Lynn Langlands, is we want some quick wins. We're sitting here. Let's get some quick wins. Now, the thought was, and we've had the thought already, that every report to councillors, every report should have a risk statement, and it also should have a risk statement about carbon reduction and climate emergency. And in a way, that will give us a layer of checks and balances. So if it's not on our list, maybe it's something outside our power, we don't know. But if we actually have that focus on every report, it's a kind of double check, and we can do that straight away, can we? Or do we need an officer in post to do that?
Well, I have been told several times that it can happen and it will happen, but actually it hasn't happened yet. So perhaps it should go as part of the recommendation to Cabinet of things we're going to do.
Chairman, if I may, the nature of the reports are being changed at the next Cabinet to try and adopt a new presentation to cover these points that members have raised. So the next Cabinet, you will see a change in the report format to pick up the points of environment, risk management, financial implications on that side.
Right. Good.
Catherine, I'm happy to move that, just in case they don't hear it, I'm happy to move that we include that.
Thank you. And the minutes will record that we've got agreement from the Executive Director to do that. Yeah. Good. You've gone quite quiet all of a sudden, Sue. So can we then talk about dark skies, sorry. Are we happy to have dark skies as an item in the strategy? I can see Sue nodding. I can't hear anybody else.
Yes.
Sue and Lynn.
Yes.
I agree with that.
Right, good.
Yeah.
Because dark skies, we're not putting up street lights, are we? So we're saving on carbon there.
Yes, and indeed we are. Right, so in that case,
and it shouldn't be just a rural thing either. I really do think at some point it should be part of a town's policy as well.
I'll leave you to argue that one.
Yeah.
Downward facing lights on roundabouts, yes, don't start.
Absolutely.
So we agree to dark skies. Good. Supply chain. Need some help with this one. Tony?
Councillor, I'm happy to address this a little bit. I mean, in terms of the supply chain, this will have sort of a more corporate effect. It'll be looking at how we commission and procure services. So we'll be working with probably through Robin Venard with the procurement hub to make sure that environmental considerations are part of every procurement of any sort of larger scale. And as you can see, it's one of our own contractors that's suggested this inclusion as well. So I'm happy to put that in there and make sure that we have those discussions, because I think that's something that we can control from a corporate level, how we conduct our own business and how we procure services going forward.
And does that include the supply chains of the people supplying us all the way down to the very end?
I will have to talk specific about how specifically we employ this, but absolutely, I mean, there's no reason what to suggest that we can't at least ask those questions and try and understand the environmental policies of the supply chain to the supply chain.
And can I ask another? Sorry, members, but I'd like to ask another question. If we're not happy with the response, are there people out there who could do the job in a way that we would prefer? Or have we got enough clout to say to them, you will do it this way?
The majority of our contracts are scored in a price and quality environment. So as you get to the bigger the contract, you know, the more consideration is given to the quality of service that's provided. And yourself and Councillor Prochak are on the waste contract group, and you know, you'll know that actually quality makes up quite a substantial part of how that contract is monitored. And that's the same for a lot of our contracts, whether it be, you know, architects to design Blackfriars, or whether it's, you know, waste collection. So quality undertakes quite a substantial part of most of our procurement processes, and we don't just go for, you know, bottom dollar cheap.
Okay.
Because we need to make sure it's value for money, and therefore, actually, what we will do in the future is consider the environmental impact of those companies as part of that quality assessment.
Thank you, Sue.
The problem is with our waste contract, and I've asked them more than once, when are they going to change over to environmentally friendly vehicles? And they've always said, well, it's too costly in terms, or they can't cope with the big batteries, etc., etc. However, there are examples of hydrogen vehicles that are collecting waste. But we have a difficulty with this contract because we've signed up for 7 years plus 7 years. So when we review the contract, I suppose I'm just flagging that up as a difficulty once you're tied into a long contract like that.
But again, I suppose this comes back to the point that we made earlier, that in future years, the procurement exercise will have a consideration for the environment strategy when it takes those elements forward.
Thank you, Tony.
Yeah, so contracts can always be negotiated if members are really keen to see new and different style vehicles introduced to the waste contract, then we can have those discussions with them. It may come with a cost. And it may come with other implications, but there's never a no to it. It needs to be discussed through. Certainly this waste contract, the new contract we've entered into, are still bedding in because they've had the bit of a delay because of the COVID implications in getting where they are, but they are very minded and actually are, I wouldn't say market leaders, but certainly have introduced in other contracts in Manchester, for instance, vehicles that are electrified to do waste collections, but they are very limited in their range and scope. They are very limited in terms of the urban areas. We wouldn't be able to introduce at this stage into the rural areas, but it's an area which that whole industry is looking at. So I think it's something in terms of this particular item going forward to supply chain. I think it's very important that within this strategy we make clear reference to that as being a route we want to pursue in ensuring the environment policies and the climate change motion is not only through the council, not only with business out there, but through our own supply chain as well. And I think that will really drive a message home as we continue procuring in the future.
Thank you. Nobody else on that item, so can we move on to business rate reduction, which was a very interesting suggestion, I thought. Oh, hang on, lots of people. Ben, can you start on this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just obviously to make members aware that obviously we have limited control over what we do in terms of business rates. You know, we're part of a business rates pool with the other councils of East Sussex, and therefore, in effect, any discretionary reductions that we may offer companies or payers of business rates would mean that we, as a council, basically just have to plug that gap. We would have to pay their rates for them. Rather than being able to sort of not just, you know, sort of give the discount. My only other concern about this suggestion is you know, what accounts for good environmental practice, and how would we monitor that? And I think the resources that would go into judging that, whilst it's a, you know, fantastic idea in terms of it provides some level of incentive, and I think maybe that principle shouldn't be lost. The idea of trying to monitor good environmental practice in individual businesses across the district, I think would be too costly in terms of resource, and we could use that resource to much better effect elsewhere.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think I agree with Ben there entirely, and also just on the council tax reduction that it mentions, my concern would be that those with higher incomes and those with more disposable income are going to find it a lot easier to implement certain good environmental practices, and if we were to, for example, reduce council tax for good environmental practice, we could end up, it could be that, for example, Councillor Osborne gets a reduction on his council tax for his incredible eco-friendly house, whereas my neighbours who rent from a housing association don't have that opportunity to receive similar reductions. So I think, unlike our reduction scheme that sort of works for those who have the lowest incomes, this could actually be targeting the wrong areas.
Thank you. Lynn? Lynn?
Sorry, yes, I'm here. Sorry, just a bit slow trying to get this microphone going. I'm actually seeing a link here between B and D, and I would have thought you could reward people more by staying local. And if we can have local businesses that actually can actually provide an environmentally friendly product, then we should be going with them and supporting them. And I think in that way we are actually recognising the good that we have locally, and keep our supply chain, which is then rewarding our businesses, local.
Thank you. Paul?
Thank you. Yeah, I would say the trouble is with the sort of housing stock that we've got, and new builds especially, everything's built to a minimum standard. And I think we need to sort of get it so that people have an incentive, if you like, to build to a higher standard. You know, as Sam said, you know, it's all right for me, I spent my money, but you know, I built my house. It's 5 years old now, but when I was building it, I made the conscious decision to add in as much insulation and extra expense, triple glazed windows, solar on the roof, solar hot water and everything else, because it's my benefit. It cost me less to heat and run my property. So that's why I do it. But, you know, to a sort of a general spec builder, they will build to a minimum standard because they don't want to spend the extra money, because they want to get massive or increased profit. You know, it goes to sort of the rental properties as well. I know in my patch, whoever the social landlord's name is now, it used to be Robert Holmes, they're investing on a lot of their houses with because we don't have gas in the countryside out here, they're investing with solar panels and air source heat pumps to reduce the cost to the tenant. But again, you know, if we go back a couple of items, if we go back to listed buildings, you can't do the work to listed buildings to improve the thermal efficiency. Now, I've got some flats in a listed building. I can just about get the right EPC now to let them out. But in a couple of years' time, I'm going to start failing on the EPC because I can't put double glazed windows in them, which I can buy easily in timber, which will match everything else. So then what happens is, am I going to go down the Airbnb route? So all of a sudden I've got less, you know, I've got properties there that people can't live in, but I can rent out to Airbnb, which seems wrong to me. So we need incentives and assistance to get people to sort of make more efficient buildings.
Thank you. I think you raise a very interesting point there. I went to a conference about local heating while I was still allowed to move around the place, and the view there was that ground source is much better than air source, and that if you do it as a community resource, then you save a lot of money further down the line. Now, I don't think our strategy talks about heating, but again, I think with the local plan coming up, perhaps planners amongst us could perhaps bring some attention to that, because you're right, Paul, builders will build to a minimum unless they're very environmentally conscious. But if we say what that minimum is, if we're allowed to by the government, then we can pull them up, I would have thought. I don't know if I'm right or wrong, but I can see some people nodding. So we don't think that the council tax is a good way to go with this.
Oh, I'd love a 10% discount. Cost me £3,500 a year to live here.
Right. So yeah, discount to everybody except Councillor Osborne. Right. So that's the next one. I've lost my space now. Business rate is. Sorry, lost here. What's the next one?
It's Chairman, it's the review strategy again due to environmental effects of social distancing, new government policy post COVID-19, etc. Item D. Yeah.
Item D. Right. Do we need to do that?
Chairman, if I may interject on this one. Being set up is the Economic Recovery Steering Group, which is Cabinet have just approved. I have to say that probably some of the implications of COVID-19 on this council has advanced some of the actions I think this environment strategy was seeking to get through the council's own ability to contribute towards climate change. With people working from home, having to adapt new practices, not travelling anywhere near as much, I think that really has had an implication on that. So my view on this is that it's one that we sort of say we note, and we really focus ourselves as an authority on this. But probably the one thing that has come out more from the East Sussex Economic Recovery Strategy and from early work that's been done by this council is the real need to have very good super fast broadband coverage across the district and mobile technology. Now, those two things have come out really high, and I think if that's achieved within this district, the amount of commuting into the district, out of the district, and within the district will be reduced significantly, not just within the council as a whole. So it has an implication, this one, on other agenda items as we go through the rest of them. So my view is that we say that we really push to the Economic Recovery Group consideration of promoting those things which will help the economy recover, but will also help the environment agenda in meeting our climate emergency.
Thank you. I was going to suggest that when we got this strategy through council, and it is the strategy, we then meet with the MP, both MPs actually, to talk about how they can help us to implement this in their constituencies. I don't know if anybody thinks that's a good idea or not. Yeah, right. I've got a note that Councillor S has raised their hand. Who is that?
Me.
You, right. Please do. Sue, was it you? No?
Councillor Prochak, your mic's on mute.
You click it once and it. Thank you. Sorry. Apologies. I think that, as I say, we met the MP this week, and one of the things that's very worrying is the way everybody's jumped back in their cars because the government have said don't go on public transport. And he disagrees with that, quite clearly disagrees that this is the wrong way to do things. And I went out today just locally trying to get to Battle, then decided I couldn't get there because the road's closed. But the cars on the road are incredible now. And so we've got to, I don't know how we're going to tackle this, but people are just they're buying cheap cars because they've been told not to go on public transport. So it gets worse and worse and worse. I just mentioned that in terms of what we're going to do in terms of transport, because I think you're absolutely right. People are thinking again about how they are living and working, and they're not going to, they're not commuting as much as they were. They like being at home, but they have to commute perhaps 2 days, 3 days a week. And we've just got to think about getting people out of their cars again.
Thank you, Lynn.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of that point, I think I can see that there are problems. I mean, we've seen it at Canberra. We will see it in our tourist industry. We will see it in our parks and our play parks. And I'm not quite sure how we can incorporate that into our strategy, but something tells me we need to consider it at least, because I think that will have to be, there will have to be things in place, I think, or things that you can draw on when, if things spike, if things return to where it was before. And I mean Canberra and obviously our children's play parks and that sort of thing are going to be an ongoing problem. So yeah, I do see a reason for it being there and somehow building it into the strategy. Right. Okay, thank you. So can we then move on to references to the High Weald Management Plan? Tim, have you anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just briefly, as members will be aware, we have adopted the High Weald Management Plan as a material consideration in all planning decisions in any event. So clearly it's an important document that we already take on board for future development. Again, I must stress this is about future development. And of course, the management plan is reviewed every 5 years. So I suspect in the next incarnation, which will be 2025, 2030, the standards within the plan in terms of climate change will be raised in any event. So yes, it's a really important document. We all already refer to it in planning for future development. So that's where we sit in the planning world. Okay, thank you. So members, are you happy then that we refer to this but don't add it onto our list of priorities because it's one of those background documents?
Captain, before you go, the High Weald Management Plan has been criticised somewhat because very, very little mention of carbon reduction and climate emergency. When I've challenged this, our officers have said, well, we have the policies in our own plan to address that, but that's just to mention that aspect.
Thank you. Before we move on, I'm going to ask Polly, you've been very quiet all this time. Have you anything you'd like to contribute at this point?
Thank you, Catherine. Yes, I've been listening very hard and agree with what's been said. I would just add to the meeting we had with Hugh Merriman. I think it was yesterday, Sue, or maybe the day before. He was very critical of the government's approach to the public transport. He said we really must get people back onto public transport, and he felt this country had taken the wrong approach by having social distancing. He felt other countries, such as Singapore, he quoted, where they're having temperature checks and deep cleansing. So whether he would take that back to Boris, I don't know, but he was quite desperate to get public transport back on board. And he said we need to make buses more fashionable for young people. So that was all I would add to what Hugh Merriman said.
Thank you. Thank you. So item F then.
Chairman, sorry, it's Tony here, before we just move on. And I just want to pick up on Councillor Prochak's point, because I think it was very pertinent at the Cabinet meeting when the High Weald Management Plan came to Cabinet, that there was a noticeable lack of reference to environmental support. And Councillor Osborne already mentioned this morning earlier that the implications of heritage properties in the countryside doesn't help with the climate change motion in trying to get the good quality environmental protection within the properties. I think that this is almost a bit of a dichotomy for the council, because on the one hand we hear regularly at planning about the need for high design quality, and on the other hand we say we also want good quality environmental standards within the property, and sometimes the two just do not match and they actually collide. And I want to try and explore how we take this strategy forward that prevents that happening in the future, that the two actually work hand in hand rather than actually having a collision course. Certainly on some properties within the new development within areas, there's members are looking very clearly at design standards and design quality, and the environment tends to be pushed down the agenda somewhat. So how do we address this in this particular action plan, to say that, yes, we take note of what High Weald Management Plan is saying, but the High Weald Management Plan needs to take note of what this strategy is saying. And I think at the moment it's one way, and it needs to be a bit of a two-way thing, that we need to be going back to them saying, we want you to strengthen your environmental standards within the High Weald. Otherwise, I think the two may not work so well together.
Yes, I thought that's what we'd suggested last time we discussed it at Cabinet, and I thought that plea had fallen on fairly deaf ears. But I think I've just heard Tim say that it's part of a suite of material policies that they use when they're determining, or we use when we're determining planning applications. So perhaps what you're saying is one for their next review. I mean, I don't know, I'm not a planner.
Can I just
yes.
Add to what Tony's saying? In terms of High Weald, we have two documents. We have the High Weald Management Plan, which is reviewed every 5 years, and we also have the High Weald Design Guide, which is the more recent, more specific document, both of which have been adopted by this council as material considerations with dealing with planning applications. So the management plan is the high level, but the design guide is more specific. We relate to both of them.
Right.
Just to mention that for clarification.
So to clarify, in my mind, if what those two guys saying is not quite as firm as we would like it to be, we don't have to operate down to their standards. We can operate up to things that we want. Yes.
Through the local plan. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the local plan. Then you're saying it's our big opportunity to really implement some of this stuff and get it set as policy.
It is, and the other area of statute, of course, is the building regulations, which are looking to up the standards in the building regulations. Had a major consultation probably about eight months ago, all about Fabric First in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of new buildings. So that's also a factor to be linked to this document, I would suggest, albeit it's separate to the planning function. It's all linked to the built environment, if that makes sense.
I think so, yes. Has any other members anything they'd like to comment? I'm aware we've got at least three members of the planning committee on this group. So any of you? No? Right. In that case, we'll move on to F, which is about the ecological collapse and the biodiversity crisis. Who would like to kick off introducing this? Tony? Ben? No? Tony?
Happy to, Chairman. It starts off, you read the very first bit, without wanting to detract from the urgent need to address climate change, I've suggested other consideration of ecological collapse is a connected issue. I think we can all read through that and say, actually, we can't disagree with that.
Yes, absolutely.
But it's one of these items which I think Ben picked up in his introduction, where we include it in the strategy, but it may be something that we take note of, but it may not be the thing that we drive immediately in bringing forward. So I think it's an important point. But we just need to sort of get it into the strategy, but not put it as part of an action plan at this moment in time.
And is it something we need to be aware of all the time we're having dealings with our grounds maintenance staff, for example?
Yes, I think that comes back to some of the comments we made earlier through Andy Verdi putting in their comments. Yes, very much indeed.
Councillor as well, just sorry, Chair, just to say that I mean, you know, obviously with regards to biodiversity, once something's built, it's built, and the biology of that area is already affected. I think in terms of new development, and Tim and Nicola will be able to give more of a steer here, I do believe biodiversity is directly addressed in the latest regulations regarding local plans and the NPPF, but I think Nicola and Tim might be able to add some additional information with that.
Well, just simplistically, you're right, Ben. The NPPF has three elements to it. It's the environmental impact, social impact, economic impact. So biodiversity sits very firmly within the environment section of the NPPF. So Ben's absolutely right. Important part of that.
Okay. Sue and Nicola, who wants to go first?
Oh, just to comment on in terms of, I think this rests very, very strongly in planning. I mean, we do get plans coming in where people say, well, I'm cutting down these many trees. And we say, what? They've already cut them down, so it's all too late. There's one in Battle, which you know very well, 200 trees. 200 trees were cut down. And then we get on to things like ancient woodland, which people don't understand that once it's gone, it can never, ever, ever be replaced. And, oh, it's only 3 trees. So we've got to actually control that. The other thing is, I was going to ask, and I perhaps should have read it more carefully, but we added at the end that we would ask the National Farmers Union. And I don't know if they made a response at all. But the new farming policies, instead of the EU policy, they are now going to be paid for good, making good use of the land. In other words, benefit the ecology and biodiversity. And it would just be good to link up with farmers, and because they are going to actually be rewarded for doing the right thing with the land. So, I mean, there's a whole area there of the way our land is being degraded. But it would be great to get the farmers on board as well.
Good. Thank you. Nicola.
I just wanted to mention about the environment bill, which is in draft at the moment, and as part of that, we'll be required to look at biodiversity net gain in new developments, which will look to areas when they're developed, they end up in a better state than they were before the development happened in terms of biodiversity, and that's really new area which we need to be working on. But we're going to be working across county on that and across the High Weald about what a consistent approach across that area and how that might work. So as I say, it's a very new area, but it's something we're very aware of, and we will be looking at that through the local plan update.
Thank you. Right. So we can then move on to
Chair. Sorry, Chair. Just to clarify, so I'm making the notes, and I know which ones to include or not.
Right.
With regards to both E and F, so the High Weald Management Plan and Ecological Collapse and Biodiversity, are we looking to include those within? Recommend those be included within the strategy?
I thought not. They were going to be the underlying backing documents. I might have misunderstood.
Maybe what I could do with the High Weald Management Plan is just make reference to it in the strategy, and then with regards to biodiversity, we can include a reference to it, but keep it out of the action plan at this stage. Until planning have had the chance to sort of introduce their own policies with regards to that. And
personally, I would hope that with our new officer joining us in mid-August, she would be extremely involved, if not leading, the action planning.
Oh, absolutely. She'll be taking the action plan and creating a programme of projects and activity out of that to make sure that we start progressing stuff. And she'll be joining the team on the 17th of August.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. Which brings us then to public transport, which I think is Tim.
Only in so much as public transport is again covered in the planning world on new development. So, for example, North East Bexhill, we're promoting the idea of using bus connections, cycle and walking strategy. So again, very much it sits within the planning in terms of planning policies to require new developments to have sustainable transport measures. But as I said, the existing scenario with the existing situation can't be rectified by the planning system per se.
Yeah, thank you. Ben.
Yeah, I mean, public transport's a funny old beast sometimes, particularly when it comes to the environment. If I was taking my little boy out for a walk this morning and a bus drove past me and it had two, chugging out diesel like nobody's business, but had 2 people sat on it. So, I mean, really, public transport as a solution it has a significant impact on the environment when it's well used. And I think that's one of the key issues here, is about how do we create a program of encouraging people to access public transport. And that may be that we need to look at the commercial viability of routes, because actually a commercially viable route is a route that's well used, and a route that's well used is one that's beneficial to the environment because people aren't travelling in cars. And the other, obviously, dichotomy with regards to public transport is that, and we're some way off this now, but as people start migrating towards electric vehicles or low emission vehicles, actually the emission per journey could be lower on an individual car rather than necessarily on an older bus. So what also we would need to look to do is how do we help local bus companies upgrade their vehicle stock to be the most environmentally friendly out there. So, I mean, actually, again, I think this is one that firmly should be in and could be included for action as part of discussions later down the line. And you know, and in terms of once vehicle prices start coming, you know, electric vehicle prices, both bus and personal, start coming down, I think that's something that'd be far more achievable for us as well.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I think Sam wanted to say something as well.
I haven't got a message. Sam, I've just got it now. Yes, and then Lynn. Sam and then Lynn. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to just make the point that I think, specifically when it comes to buses, if buses are regular and reliable, then they become a good source of transport and more people use them. I know the issue here in Sidley, for example, is we essentially have 2 to 3 main buses that come through, usually hourly or half hourly. They're always late. It's that old adage of you wait for a bus for ages and then 2 come along at once. They're just not reliable. The times are not fitting with when most people want to use buses. I think they just kept the same timetables from years hence, and that there's also no sort of nighttime evening bus provision, certainly here in Bexhill. So as I think Lynn was saying about encouraging young people to use buses, well, a lot of the young people in Sidley who have, say, clubs in the evening, they might be able to get a bus into town, for example, to go to a club or to go to an event that they're going to, but they won't be able to get a bus back. And so I think it's about looking at if we're going to make buses a good source of transport for people, we need to make sure that they can rely on those buses to be there regularly, frequently, to get them where they need to go for the time they need to be there, because otherwise people just don't use them, and it's left to the 4 elderly residents who don't mind when they go to Sainsbury's, but they want to go to Sainsbury's at some point in the morning, so they'll sit and wait until the bus arrives, you know. So, yeah.
Thank you. Lynn?
Yeah, I think I've got a few points on that, really, in terms of buses. I absolutely agree with Sam. I think buses should be something that should be encouraged, but I think the right size, we've got massive buses banging potholes in our roads and with 2 people on, like you say. I think the right size, the links to where they are going should be much more improved. They are appalling. They're not really taking you anywhere specific, some of these buses. And I think we need to consider much smaller buses, a bit like the town bus actually, around towns, and just try and relieve the pressure of great big buses going there, and make them round town like the yellow bus, hop on, hop off, you know, so that it fits in better with where you live. They're just ideas that I've had in my head, but I think public transport needs to be flagged up as something that we should encourage people to use and young people to use. And also, I suppose there is the issue of price, I suppose, which I don't know what you do about, because obviously, you know, our main operators have a price that they need to work to, but it can be done because it's been seen on the town bus, and I think that sort of thing, that sort of service should be encouraged.
Thank you. So that's definitely included. Anybody else? Yes, I've just had a bong. Councillor Osborne, Paul.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, we haven't mentioned trains.
No.
Not that we can actually do a great amount with trains, I assume. The ironic thing is, at the moment, the Marsh link that runs from Ashford through to Eastbourne, for the last sort of few years, there's been sort of murmurings and requests that it's increased to a 4-car train to carry more people in comfort. That's always been ignored. Yet for the last 10 weeks, it's been a 4-car train and there's no one on it, which seems ironic. But there it is. Also, it's a diesel train, which probably isn't the bestest. And they've been talking about sort of a dual fuel or a hydrogen train, but as yet they've not done it. It would be cheaper to probably do a dual fuel hydrogen train rather than electrify the route, which would cost sort of many millions of pounds. But we haven't mentioned the trains, and I know probably 20 years ago there were all this talk of the string of pearls, so-called, with additional stations, one at Glyn Gap, and there was a couple of others planned as well on that line, which never really got anywhere because people were more interested in driving their car. And to be honest, if you was going to drive to Curry's at Glyn Gap and pick up a TV, you don't want to carry it home on a train. So you're going to drive, but you know, equally you just get it delivered. But I think, you know, trains is something we could look at maybe, but you know, we don't have any sway over it, to be honest. Difficult one.
We have regular meetings with Marshalling and with the HS1 people regularly, annually, and there is certainly talk of doing exactly what you're saying, increasing the train length, which I suspect might have happened coincidentally with COVID, which is why it's empty. And yeah, I've got going to say anyway. Those discussions are, and apparently there is a prototype, different sort of fueled train around now. I know Vicky is on the line to speak in a moment, and she knows all about trains, so she might be able to answer your question. But first of all, I've got Polly, then Vicky, then Tony, and then Sue. So Polly.
I wanted to talk about buses, but first of all, to answer Paul's question about trains, it came up with Hugh in our meeting on Tuesday, and he said that electrifying railway lines cost a fortune, and it's not environmentally good, but he's talking about retrofitting diesel engines with hydrogen. And he said this is an exciting new development. It would be great help to us here because at the moment we have the diesel train, the Ashford International, belching, as he said, belching diesel all the way through Bexhill and Pevensey, simply because there's a very small patch of railway at Orr which can only take diesel. So he said he's looking at a hybrid of batteries, but he's not keen on batteries because he said the trade in the market in batteries is in China, and he said he has a dim view on too much trade with China. So that was my bit about trains. But going back to buses, I do think buses is self-defeating. The less buses you have, the less people will use them. And then the buses will say, well, they're not being used, we cut the service further. So I think we should have much more buses, as they do in Brighton. There's always a bus you can catch in Brighton, and they go right out to the estates. And also, I think those electric signs at bus stops telling you how many minutes to the next bus. I think we should try and have those at every bus stop. We've got a few here in the town centre in Bexhill, but I think those are so useful to know when the next bus is coming, how long you've got to wait. So I'm all for public transport, make it easier.
Thank you. Vicky, you're going to tell us about trains?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, the trains have been increased, which is why there's 4 cars going along the Marshalling at the moment, so that people can self-distance, and that's been a very purposeful and positive effect. The trains from Hastings up to London on the Battle line have also been strengthened for that very reason and reduced in timing to 1 an hour, but I do believe they are going to get more frequent as the restrictions are lifted. My main comment is about having a hub for interconnecting trains and buses. I have a cousin who worked on the Parliamentary Railway Committee, and he was one of those that got ensured that the new Plus Bus ticket was added, and so that local bus companies were really encouraged to start and end their journeys at railway stations. So there were less cars on the road for these little short journeys, either to go and pick up somebody from the station or to drive down there and park your car all day long. I also think that having a hub, a central place for interchange of buses, whether it's Eastbourne or Bexhill or Hastings Station at the moment, lots of buses end and begin their journeys there. So if you want to come in from one place and go out to another, that's where you have your interchange. And I think that is something that we should be considering in our local plan as well, to have a a local interchange, because then I think people will use buses and trains more, and with less car parking spaces, it's the only way forward. And to somehow, I love the idea of making buses and trains more attractive for young people. And yeah, I don't know how we can do this. I know if you go to Bexhill College, you get a bus pass and you can use that all week round. And I think a lot of people do use that. But I absolutely concur with what Councillor Coleman was saying. There are no evening buses, and that's what we desperately lack. The other thing was Battle Town Council had a meeting with Hugh Merriman MP, and he also intimated that the railway might be introducing a 3-day-a-week season ticket, which would mean that people who are working from home as well as commuting, will then be encouraged to use the trains. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. I've got Tony next, then Sue, and then Sam. Tony.
Yes, just very briefly, Chairman. I've gone back into the environment strategy, the draft one, which we're working on. And under the item of air quality, we talk about a number of actions which generally look about car-free areas. Talks about cycle parking, electric vehicle charging points. Talks about electric vehicles moving away from diesel vehicles, but it doesn't actually talk anywhere about public transport. So I think this is one we can actually pick up as an action point in there. I'm aware there's a number of groups around, like BRAG, Bexhill Rail Action Group. There's the groups between Hastings, Rother and East Sussex County Council, where they meet on transport matters and that. So there's quite a bit going on already, but I think this is one we need to strengthen within the action plan. So we'll pick that up and take that away. Just one point of note, I did go down to Cornwall some years ago, and one of the key minerals used for batteries is lithium, and that's quite abundant in Cornwall because of the tin mines down there. So they are looking at that as a possible market into the future, which could support this industry in the future. So we may not have to go to China for that sort of mineral extraction.
Thank you. I thought it came from South America, mined by young children, but Cornwall sounds like a much better bet. I didn't know that.
They're mined by old fishermen there.
Thank you. Sue.
I think everybody said it all. The only other thing that Hugh Merriman mentioned, there's a trialling, I'm not sure where, of e-scooters, and they you don't have to have a license for them, and it's recommended you wear a helmet, but they sound pretty. I think they sound cool. I think our young people could get on those.
They only go 15 miles an hour. Sam.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Langland's put a name in the chat as well just before me. But I further to what Councillor Cook was saying about the links between trains and buses, I often have to get the train from Battle Station to get into London when I have an audition or a meeting and such. And the buses, whilst there is a bus that goes between actually just outside my house in Sidley and Battle Station, the buses are never in line with the times of the trains. So I either have to get a bus that gets me there sometimes 2 hours before the train, or I have no choice but to find another form of transport, which could be a lift or a taxi or something like that, because I mean, I'm certainly not walking from Sidley to Battle. The other thing I was going to say is about accessibility in terms of trains, and I know Catherine and Vicky and others have been quite passionate about Battle Station and having the accessibility on both sides of the track. And I think looking at all of our train stations and probably all of our bus stops as well, and looking at how accessible they are to people with disabilities and people with different needs, I think that would be a really positive step to encourage more people to use public transport.
Thank you. Yes, I agree. Lynn, I'm sorry if I missed you out.
Oh, no worries at all. I just quickly wanted to point out, I don't think we've mentioned Park and Ride, have we?
No.
In terms of public transport going, and I think if we can keep our towns free of cars, at least we're reducing the carbon emissions there. And I think Park and Rides are a really good idea. And it's certainly something I think we need to look at, bearing in mind we're talking pedestrianisation, which means we're actually looking at moving cars out of towns and trying to create an environment where they will park further away and can be driven in by a little shuttle bus or something.
Thank you. Oh, hang on. Somebody. Sorry, someone just indicated and I missed it.
It was me, Chair, Ben.
Thank you, Ben.
Sorry, I just wanted to sort of sort of build on the points that have been made, particularly around some of the points that Councillor Langland's picked up. I think obviously the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact in the way that we behave, how people access work, and so on and so forth. And I think public transport in particular will play a real key role in how that in that into the future. This, I think, will be a really crucial discussion point as part of the economic recovery plan that will be coming through that steering group. And what we will do is make sure that the environment strategy is heavily referenced in the material provided to that group in coming up with its recommendations, because I think it's really important that the environment strategy helps steer the economic recovery for the district into the future. So I'll just to sort of make that point, that we'll make sure that happens.
Thank you. And that will also need feeding into the County Council's recovery strategy, won't it? Because they commission bus public transport and also commission the electronic real-time bus.
Yeah, so that's the county recovery plan's going through Team East Sussex, which is not necessarily the county council, although they're leading the development of it, but it is, and we are making sure that the environmental standards and environment and climate change are at the very heart of those discussions as well, in our participation as officers through that. And I know that Councillor Bayliss, who's our representative on Team East Sussex, is also making sure that the environment remains at the heart of that as well.
Well, that's good to hear, because I mean, the things that we want aren't necessarily within our gift to provide, and we need to be leaning very heavily on those who are in a position to do that for us.
Agreed.
So I'm glad to hear that. Good. Thank you. The next thing then is about farming, isn't it? Include farmland and the working countryside.
So, Chair, if I may, obviously the Highwood AONB unit have provided quite a comprehensive response to how farming impacts on the environment, as have Dr. Simon Foster and the Crowhurst Environmental Group. Obviously they talk about things like soil degradation and degradation of biodiversity in the countryside in general, as a reaction to how the landscape is farmed. I think, from our perspective, I think whilst they're valid points, there's very little that we can do to influence farming. I mean, it's not development, so it's not necessarily going to be coming up in the local plan in the same way. Although there may be some elements of the local plan that could address it. I'll let Tim deal with that. But I think it's from my perspective, I would recommend that we keep it as a reference point in the strategy and await for sort of post-EU policy to better understand how we as a local authority can help influence how the land is managed, how the land is farmed, and sort of the financial landscape for farmers post leaving the EU, and then maybe bring it back in either next year or the following year when we've got a clearer idea of what actions we could contribute.
Thank you. Sue raised her hand, but I just wanted to say, and she might be able to answer this for me, we are talking about the working countryside, not just farming, and lots of farm land is often used for other things now, which require planning consent, and surely we should be considering the effect on the soil and the biodiversity aspects of that before we grant permission. So I don't think we can just write it off quite like that. So
I agree with you. I think we should actually focus obviously on planning in terms of planning, and if we had we also know the historical value of our ancient woodland and the field patterns, the small fields. I think it's really quite important that we actually at least to have a dialogue with our farmers, because they will be doing things to get grants, and it will be interesting to know what they are doing, and as you say, influence and talk to them about what they are doing. So I think we do need to have a reference to the countryside, very much so. And we've already talked about degradation of soil. I mean, they are sterile fields. Some of the fields we have in Rother. They say there's something like, I don't know, about 50 harvests left in some of the soil that we've got. And so I think we need to know about it. We need to influence. We need to talk to landowners about it. And of course, we've got the new local plan coming up, where we will be asking, Tim will be asking for new land to build more houses. And there's not many places it can go except in our countryside, in our AONB. And so we have this huge challenge in front of us. So I think that is something that's a wide subject that we should keep there. I agree with you, Catherine.
Okay, thank you. Have I missed anybody this time? Right. So you've got that down, Ben? No.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll do a summation at the end of it all as to what my notes are on each action, and then we can agree or not whether I've got it on the button.
I'm so glad you said that. Right, the last one then. No, I'm wrong. Penultimate one is hydrogen and biomethane. Would anybody like to start? No?
Chairman, if I may,
Yes.
it's Tony.
Yes.
I'm quite interested in the comments under that heading by Southern Gas Networks in the first paragraph, saying today around a third of UK's greenhouse gas emissions come from heating. About 83% of the UK homes are heated by boilers that burn natural gas. We do pick up in our smart digital section in the environment strategy about this matter. I'm just trying to find the page, which picks up use of smart technology can address environmental challenges, energy meters, reduce the energy usage. This comes back to a bit around the high wheeled design guides and how we actually develop our properties in the future. If we're going to have an impact on climate change, then properties being built in the future will need to be well insulated and not be reliant on these kind of natural energy sources that actually contribute to the climate change. So I think this is an issue I think needs picking up within the local plan under policies about what buildings and what heating or what insulation is provided on properties that will contribute to the reduction of hydrogen and biomethane. And I think we need to be looking in that context. Otherwise, it will just be more houses. The other side of it is, in the past, we've done work with East Sussex County Council on energy efficiency within existing buildings, and there's quite a bit of work about Homefront. I'm sure some of you will remember that, and funding going into that. But it always seems to be something which is under the radar. Maybe this should be elevated a lot more, that if we do want to insulate our homes and contribute to reducing the carbon footprint, this seems to be quite a loud message that Southern Gas are giving out, that if 83% of homes are heated by boilers and a third of the UK gases come from heating, predominantly that would be from domestic properties, then there needs to be some action taken on that. And I don't think we've sufficiently reflected that within the environment strategy at the moment. We need to pick that up and I think take that forward a bit more on that side.
Non-gas engineers would say the answer is to stop using gas altogether and use ground-sourced heat pumps, because we need to stop using fossil fuels, which I thought was very interesting comment that the gas people made.
I think certainly within what Southern Gas was saying is that there needs to be more R&D sort of research and development on how the methanes and that can be taken out of the gas. So you actually make the gas environmentally friendly, as opposed to trying to find another source of heating. And there is work going on that at the moment. And perhaps maybe one of the messages we need to get to government to encourage government to take a more active role in research and development on meeting this environment agenda if we're going to meet the in our case 2030 climate change, in their case 2050.
Okay, Nick, I've got Paul and then Nicola. Paul.
Yeah, on the gas front, I think from 2023 you're not allowed to put a gas central heating boiler into a new build home. which is fine, but then I have to change the building reg somewhat at the moment, because when we built my son's house, we didn't put a boiler in, and we actually got marked down, and we only got a B rating as opposed to an A rating, because we didn't fit a boiler, which seemed ironic. But I think that also one of the big boiler manufacturers has started making new gas boilers which can be retrofitted with a different burner. So you can fit a gas boiler now, but then if in the future, in a couple of years' time, a different gas comes along, you can change the burner reasonably cheaply. But that doesn't get over the fact that there's probably 30 million gas boilers in the country, that when they do change to a different gas, there's going to be 30 million gas boilers going back into a recycling pot. So, you know, where do you go with that? Difficult one.
Thank you, Nicola, and then Lynn. Nicola.
Councillor Osborne slightly stole my thunder with that, because I was going to talk about the boiler changes as well. So in 2025, there won't be a requirement, won't be allowed to install gas boilers from that point. They'll be taken through the building regulations. And part of what we can actually do within planning is taking out, and can only really be done through building regulations. And there was a future home standard which was consulted upon last year, and that ended well, the consultation ended in January this year, about how they may seek to change the real building regulations to reduce carbon footprints for new homes. So what I'm really saying is that things are changing all the time, and we just need to keep a watching brief on what those things are. Things will change through building regulations, so we won't be able to influence that, because that will be the building regulation standards. But where we can make improvements, we'll seek to do that in the round through the local plan, considering all the other things also.
Thank you, Lynn.
That's perfect, actually, Nicola. Thank you very much for that. The point I was, oh gosh, I've almost forgotten the point I was going to try and make now, because I was listening to that so intently. I think we should be looking more at local energy companies and people that are generating energy for their particular area or their village or and try and somehow reduce this massive sort of production of energy that becomes very expensive, and try and downgrade it a bit to, well, it's not downgrading it, I think it's upgrading it really, to dealing with local energy sources and get people generating their energy from their own buildings and from their own ground sources and air sources.
Thank you. I've got somebody else I've just missed. Bear with. Who's just indicated?
That would be me, Chair.
Well, please do then. Thank you.
So, okay, just wanted to respond about the local energy company, really. I mean, under the existing action plan, we have the priority area of energy, and under the first action under healthy places for that is to explore investing in local green energy, including public-private partnerships, community-owned schemes, and form not-for-profit municipally owned green energy companies such as district heating. So, in terms of local energy and what we're looking to try and do, I think I think this area is particularly well covered in the existing strategy and action plan. I think with regards to the specifics that Southern Gas Networks have raised about hydrogen and biomethane, whilst important points, I think they sit in a realm that's far above what a district council is able to achieve. It's sort of, you're talking about universities collaborating with R&D, you're talking about government subsidy and you know, sort of national and international scale change, rather than necessarily what RIA's Rother district could achieve. Now, not to say that that's not important. I just want to sort of I'd like to make sure that the strategy for us isn't including things over which we basically have no influence and just get ignored in years to come. So I think it's being addressed in part through building regulations and through other avenues that the central government are looking at. My recommendation on this one, Chair, would be to exclude it from the strategy, but obviously keep it on the table for years to come. If there's a voucher scheme that comes forward from government at some point in the future, or so on and so forth, we could look at that. But local energy is very much firmly already covered within the existing action plan and strategy.
Well, glad to hear that, because the wider thing we're talking about is still very much talking about how to use fossil fuel, which is, as we know, finite. But talking about local heating, is there any thought or mechanism by which you could perhaps join with Hastings, which I know is a different authority, but it's very close by, and if you join with Hastings, you then get a much larger urban area to promote local energy?
Yeah, we've already had some preliminary discussions with Hastings Borough Council. They've appointed an environment officer, same as in the similar vein as we will do. Theirs is far more focused on energy and energy generation. So I think it's once the strategy is adopted and we've got Christina in place, I think we'll be very, very much in a position to start working closely with Hastings Borough to try and bring forward actions that will benefit us all.
That's good to know. Thank you. And lastly, then, vehicle noise.
Well, vehicle noise, yes. Well, my hope is that within the next 10 years, we're all traveling around in electric buses, so they won't be as often, and they'll be very quiet. So I'm hoping that we'll solve that problem by default. But no, I taking the point a bit more seriously, I think it's one of those. It's one of those areas that again is sort of, it's not necessarily directly related to climate change at this stage, specifically with regards to the noise pollution, but it does have a wider environmental impact in terms of the biology that lives adjacent to roads and so on and so forth. So I think it's something for the group to consider, but I would say if it is included, it would be a reference at this stage with maybe a look at actions later down the line to see if there's anything we can do to address it.
Thank you. Members, any comments on that?
Just one briefly, Chair, if that's all right.
Yeah, please do.
Only that whilst I'm not too fussed about, as it says here, creating intrusions on passive enjoyment of outstanding beauty, I just wanted to comment that it has been lovely to hear, certainly perceive that I'm hearing more bird song and more diversity of wildlife, seeing more animals sort of around in urban areas since we've all been locked down during this pandemic, and it does sort of give you a glimpse of what could be possible in a future with less vehicles and less sort of urban intrusion on habitats.
Indeed, and clear skies.
If I could just say,
yes.
Chairman, I would say, like Sam said, the last 10 weeks, from my point of view, has been absolute and pure bliss.
Yeah.
I've been doing I've done nearly 2,000 miles on my bike, and it's just been so absolutely peaceful, you wouldn't believe it. And I was late one evening, and I did 5 miles on the A259 from Brenzett back to Rye, and one car overtook me as I entered Rye.
Gosh.
And that is sort of, considering that usually is about 12,000 vehicles a day on that road, and at 5 o'clock I went along there and one car come past me in 5.5 miles. So but the motorbikes coming back to life was a bit of a shock for most people, and my email box has been full of angry from everywhere, from Icklesham to Iden to Playden to everywhere, of the motorbikes making a racket, and they do come past my house at about 80 miles an hour.
Yeah.
And I can hear them all the way to Canberra as well. So there is a consideration, but what we can do about it here, I don't know.
Okay, if that's the end of the discussion, I'm going to ask Ben now to summarise what it is we're going to ask Cabinet.
Thank you, Chair. Bear with me a second. Let me just get the full list up so I can go through it one by one. Okay, so in terms of our recommendations to Cabinet, then we'll be looking at the 10 additional recommendations and going through them. In terms of A, which is light pollution and dark skies, I've got down here that we will include it as a reference in the body of the strategy, but we won't add it into the action plan at the moment because there's there will be some action taken on it as part of the new local plan, and therefore including it as a reference is important, but it will be picked up through the new local plan rather than a direct action on our own action plan.
Yeah.
in terms of B, the supply chain, it's a firm yes, and it will be included into the action plan to make sure that it's taken into account, which is, I think, an opportunity then for the council to really start addressing this in our procurement processes. For C, that's the reduction in business rates. I've put a no, so that will remain. That it's the steering group's recommendation that it remains out of the strategy, as it is with D, which is the review of the strategy, again due to the environmental effects of social distancing and COVID. I think that was on the basis that actually we've already said that this is a live document. It will be looked at time and time again, and this group will continue to meet in years to come. So actually, by default, that will happen anyway. I don't think it's necessary to include a specific reference to COVID, and I don't want to delay the adoption of this strategy so that we can drive it forward in terms of its programming. E, which is the additional reference, adding the references to the Highwood Management Plan. Much like A, it's yes, we will include it as a reference into the body of the strategy, and it should be picked up through the local plan. I think with the same I've got for F, which is the ecological collapse and biodiversity crisis, which again will be picked up through the local plan. I think what will be important is that this group then starts to reflect on those after the local plan has been, the new local plan has been adopted in years to come. We could then come back to these lists and say, okay, these are the changes that happen. How do we help drive that forward going from there? G is public transport. That was a firm yes to include into the action plan, as well as inclusion of I've picked up the discussion about buses, trains, and Councillor Coleman's point with regards to ensuring that we have improve access for people with disabilities and additional needs. H, which is the inclusion of farmland and the working countryside, again picking that up as a reference into the body of the strategy, but to be included within as a key consideration in the development of the new local plan, and how development will affect farmland and the working countryside into the future. I, which is biomethane and hydrogen, I've put no at this stage because it's being introduced through building regulations and other avenues. And then J, which is vehicle noise, again a reference, but with to be considered again in more detail in later years, once we've sort of made progress with the climate change aspects and the other aspects that were included within the action plan already. How's that sound, Chair?
Amazing. Thank you.
Chairman, I just one item. Sorry, Chairman, I had one item under D, which is the review strategy again to the environment on the COVID stuff. Whilst we were saying no action on that, we were going to make reference back to the economic recovery group to make sure they picked up environmental considerations. So it's just that one, especially around broadband and mobile technology.
I'll make sure we include that as part of the recommendation.
Well, I'm picking all those up. Yeah.
When is this likely to go to Cabinet?
It will be going to Cabinet on the 27th of July. So you'll be considering it in a few weeks, and it will then go up to Council in September for formal adoption.
I was just trying to think of when we could usefully, at an early stage, all meet Christina, and introducing it to Cabinet would have been the ideal, but she won't be here, will she?
No, but I will make sure that once she's had a chance to bed in, that we'll do some informal introductions offline before we put her in front of Cabinet.
Well, I think that's good. I think we should all like to meet her because we've all got high hopes for what she's going to be doing for us.
Absolutely. We're very much looking forward to having her join the team as well. So,
members, are you happy with that way forward? Don't all shout at once. I can't see you all.
Yes.
Good.
Very happy.
Yes. Yes.
Just in addition to that, Chair, I mean, I'd like to draw members' attention to Appendix C, which is, not for discussion at this point, I think, but what we will look to do is when we're developing the programme of activity, Appendix C is about what we as a council can do to help residents effectively reduce their own impact on the environment. And just to sort of make you aware that as part of our the development of our programme and our programme of activity, we're going to be using this as a key basis to start helping residents reduce their own impact, rather than it sort of just being us pulling our own weight and bringing everybody together with us on that. So I thought that was a really useful piece of information, and those were suggestions that came direct from residents as well. So,
and I have had one comment from outside that it is good to see a strategy which includes residents, not just what the council is doing to people. So
Yeah.
Well done for that. So, Tony looks like he's about to speak.
Yes, please, if I may, Chairman. As this is a formal recommendation to Cabinet, can I please ask you to get a mover and a seconder and take a vote on it, please?
You can.
Move.
No, go on. Thank you.
Move.
Moved by Councillor Broder, seconded by.
I can second it. Oh, no.
Yeah, I'll move it. Second.
Right. Moved Councillor Broder, seconded Councillor Osborne. Are we okay?
Yep.
Thank you. So have we finished?
I'd like some AOMB things. That's all right. Yes.
Oh, I don't have any other business at my meetings.
Yes,
I know I do.
It encourages rambling. Carry on.
Okay. Do I ramble? The one thing was I wondered if you had more feedback on pensions, which we discussed at the last meeting. The second thing is we were saying we were going to identify environment champions, and we've had today a suggestion from one of Lynn's residents. She would like to help. She's in a block of flats, as I understand it, and she would like to actually help with recycling. And I think we need to sort of sit down and say how we're going to do those two things, because it's great to use Lynn's resident as somebody where we could actually say, well, we don't want to commit officer time, they haven't got it, but we would like to do something to actually support residents in terms of greater effective recycling. So I just wanted to ask about those two things. We've already said we're going to do risk assessments in the environment on our reports, which can start after Cabinet. The other thing we said we'd do for a quick win was my alerts. We'd do the green.
Yeah.
So I hope that can get going as well. Thank you.
Sorry, Sue, I hadn't seen it on the agenda because I assumed it wasn't there. Sorry. Right. Responses to Councillor Projak?
Yeah, happy to pick those up with you, Chair. In terms of the pensions and the environment champions, we were we were going to wait for the adoption of the strategy and for Christina to be in place to help coordinate volunteers, and then for us to start, progressing the action plan, if you like. And it's purely just been a resource issue, making sure that we get the environment strategy adopted first. The risk assessments, I think, as Tony said, the environment assessment is already going to, and you'll see many of my reports coming to Cabinet now will have an environmental impact assessment at the bottom. It'll be brief, but it highlights the environmental impact of any decisions that are being made, and I think it helps Cabinet members make those choices. But you'll see those at the July Cabinet. So that's an action that has, I suppose, already taken place. My alerts, absolutely, the green alerts. We're just pulling together the green tips, if you like, that we're going to be looking to send out. So and then once we've got a list of them, we'll be sending them out on a weekly basis, along with the other My Alerts.
Excellent, thank you, Councillor Cook.
I know I'm not a part of this steering group committee, but I would be quite happy to be a part of a public transport champion group.
Excellent, thank you. Right, is there any other business?
Councillor Coleman, Chair, if I may.
Yes, you may.
Only to further on the pensions point, just to express, and I'm sure other committee members will join me, my disappointment in the fact that the East Sussex County Council group decided not to fully divest their pensions away from fossil fuels, and to pay tribute to the two members of the 5-member committee who voted to divest. Unfortunately, they were outvoted.
They were. I'm sure that's not the last of it, though. In fact, there are a lot of questions to County Council on that issue. Right. Anybody else?
Can I just make a quick point?
Yes.
One is that I wanted to say that the lady in question that was in touch with me is actually in Sam's ward, which is really quite nice, because I think your ward's great that they've come up with some really progressive stuff, Sam. So well done to members of your ward. That's great. But also, she actually resides in a flat that is run by Optivo. And I think we could do something here with getting them on board in terms of getting these champions going and trying somehow to coordinate what's going on amongst the residents in Optivo to try and keep it a little bit more tight and a little bit more aware and before we extend it out. So I think this flat idea is where we should start. And I think, Sue, quite rightly, I think we should have an idea of what we'd like them to do. I think they're really willing, but I'm not sure they know exactly how they're going to do it. So I think it would be good of us to come up with a sort of, well, these are the ideas we think we'd like you to do.
When Optivo was Rotherhomes at a previous lifetime and then became Amicus Horizon, they used to have residents groups in flats, I don't know if they still do because Optivo is really rather distant, to discuss precisely those issues.
Chair, if I may, we do meet regularly with Optivo, both in their development capacity and in their existing stock management capacity. We can use those in relationships to sort of help find a way into helping improve their existing stock, which I know they have a program of doing already, but also the about sort of as you say, residents hubs and residents groups, and how we can help bring residents on board to help themselves in terms of the environment, if you like.
And have we any means of persuading them, gently or otherwise, to retrofit their stock so it meets better environmental standards when they're doing refurbishments and when they're not doing refurbishments as a matter of good practice?
I think there is a program that they have in place. I can find out more details to provide back to this group at a later stage.
Be interesting.
I might be able to help there, Ben, actually.
Oh, there's Joe. Joe's here. Yeah, I forgot Joe was here. Yeah, Joe's here.
There are a couple of programs, principally that they run it operating through the Interreg, funded through the European funding, and they have a general program and a policy commitment to retrofitting their properties because it makes sense for them as an investment longer term, as for reasons Councillor Osborne's already highlighted. They also have a good track record, Optivo, in terms of resident involvement and resident engagement. They are, like any organisation, if you look at the case by case, you'll get reports of poor practice and challenges, I'm sure. But in a general sense, Optivo are a good housing association, good registered provider, and they do have one of the highest levels of customer satisfaction in the industry, and are pretty effective, albeit relatively, to other housing associations at engaging effectively with their residents. Yeah.
Thank you. Right. I'll say it again. Anybody else got any other business? In which case, I shall say thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Thank you, Ben, for all your efforts with making sense out of what we've been saying. And look forward to the Cabinet report and have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.